Uno, dos, tres, cuatro. Do, 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 S. Do, 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 H. Do, 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 O. And a lot of other letters. It's the Showrunner Show.
I was like, how far are we going to go?
I know. I was like, oh, this is going to take the whole episode. She does the whole thing. Created good anticipation. Good
Thank you.
suspense.
Yeah. The suspense of, oh, no.
What have we done?
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Showrunner Show, where every week we demystify some aspect of the job of showrunning for anyone who works in TV, who wants to work in TV, or just wants to know how it's all made. I'm Drew Dowdle.
I'm John Eric Dowdle.
And I am Stacy Shabosky. We are glad you're here. I'm feeling it today, guys.
Yeah. So this is part 2 of our pitch series. You want to sell your show. To do that, you'll have to have a meeting in which you sit, or you'll be invited to have a meeting in which you sit around a boardroom table and pitch it to execs. The people you're selling to will likely have some very specific questions in mind that if you can speak to, and if you can, hit those questions without them asking, will up your chance of a sale tremendously.
This is part 2 in our pitch series.
So yeah, let's get into the questions, and then we can discuss them as we go. So first, I'd say the first question, what genre is it? Is this a limited series? Is this an ongoing series? Is it a comedy, a thriller, a drama?
How long? We see this as a 30-minute comedy, blah, blah, blah. We see this as a, 60-minute dramatic, right? Would you say that?
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a pretty simple one, but one to, really think through. And, likely if it's a comedy, you're pitching to the comedy people. If it's a drama, you're pitching to the drama people at that network. So, it's, even if you think they know that and it's obvious, we see this show as a, 60-minute, dramatic comedy set in the world of the interesting world of, or exciting world of mountaineering, or whatever. Like, I'm just
Sold.
making, but just something that gives them a sense of what genre, what generally, what kind of show is this?
You can throw in things like premium, or elevated, or broad, or it's sort of, or dark.
Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid to mention maybe some reference shows that everyone in the room is aware of. As I think some people think, oh, this is not like any other show ever, and it's I can't compare it to anything. But yeah. I think it's helpful, to say tonally we kind of feel like this is in the world of Succession or whatever. To kind of give you just a general vibe of the show, I think can be helpful to have those references.
Yeah. Well, I would put that as the second question. Like, what is it like? What is it like? Yeah. What is this show like? So, what is it? It's a, true story of a this and a that and that. Like, you sort of give like what kind of show it is, like what the phylum or species of show this is, and then you get into, it is like, we had a pitch for something called The Order, which was a true story about a polygamous Mormon crime family. And maybe I shouldn't be talking, but I think it's okay.
That's okay.
That's
all right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we said, this is the Soprano, and we touted as an uprising story, a story of, the younger generation uprising. We said, this is the Sopranos if you found out like Meadow and Chrissy and AJ decided to overthrow their father for control of the organization. And that was how we pitched it. And it gave you a sense of, oh, I would like to see the Sopranos in which the kids overthrow Tony Soprano. Like, that would be awesome. And it sort of lets them play the movie in their own minds a little bit. And we found that helpful. And still is unmade. So if you're an exec out there looking to, it's a great, it
what a great
be
story.
A great series. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. People tend to make fun of comps, but I love them. The whole like, it's so-and-so meets so-and-so. It's Jaws meets, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire. You figure it out. Yeah. Perfect.
No, I mean,
I'd watch that. Yeah.
I would watch that too. Doubt NATO.
I find this really helpful. And in fact, actually, when I'm preparing for something, when I'm preparing to write something, I figure out what the comps are for the thing, and I watch a crap ton of them. And it's very helpful. It's so helpful to see what people have done right or what they've done wrong in your comp world.
Yeah, you're great about that.
Well, I'm super analytical, and I find it so helpful. I just find it really helpful.
I'd love to just rewind too for a minute, going back to like what genre is it? When you mentioned kind of limited or ongoing, and like maybe we could just spend one minute on that decision. I think I recently had a friend pitch me something that was he was pitching as a limited, and that was my first question after he's done is like why limited? It seems like the world you're pitching is very much an ongoing, and his thought was, well, I figure limited is just, a smaller commitment on their part and therefore has a better chance to sell because it's not, I have 5 seasons. It's kind of, a smaller bite size. But I think very much the opposite is true. Limiteds are always harder to sell than a show that has, the potential to go ongoing. They're not, going to commit in the room to saying, oh, yeah, we'll take 3 seasons of this. You're never going to get that kind of commitment. So they know the power to go beyond season 1 or, is in their hands. So I think, the logic of pitching something, if it can be ongoing, pitch it as an ongoing version of that, I think is always going to automatically, raise your chances of selling the show.
Yeah.
And it's good for you. It's good for you. It's good for them because, seasons 2 and beyond, they don't have to build the sets and they don't have to educate the audience on what this show is quite as much. They have to tweak, the knowledge of the audience to like, oh, this season we're going to do this other crazy thing, as opposed to like, what even, is a show? So like from a marketing standpoint, seasons 2 and beyond are cheaper for studios and networks. And for you as a writer, like you have to figure out so much tone in the pilot and then in the first season. Like you have to figure out so much tone and just the way who you cast and how it's like season 2, you're writing with actors in mind. You're creating a show that like, oh, this actor's amazing. Let's give them more stuff season 2. Like season 2, you can really deliver on stuff in a way where you're just learning it in season 1. And so it's if you can do an ongoing, it's 100%. I guess the downside of an ongoing is sometimes it's harder to get movie stars for an ongoing because Tom Cruise is not going to want to sign up for 6 seasons of a show that might go off the rails after 3 episodes. He
might sign up for that mountaineering thing you pitched earlier that sounded white hot.
but so the casting, it's sometimes hard to get premier actors, movie stars to do. Like Brad Pitt is not going to do a 6-season ongoing,
right?
Unless he owns it somehow, or unless it's like a different kind of thing in some way.
Yeah.
I feel like usually the material itself, the idea itself tells you whether it's going to be limited or ongoing. I mean, you should definitely spend a moment sitting there thinking about it like, could this be ongoing? But if you've got something where your entire cast dies, if you've got like a true crime thing or you've got a horror thing where almost everybody's dead at the end or something like that it's final within itself, then it's going to be limited.
Yeah. If you're doing a show on, the Unabomber or something like a historical true story
event,
an event, Waco, obviously that made sense to do as a limited. But the flip side, you were saying that it's very hard to get, big movie stars on an ongoing. The flip side of a limited is, yes, you can get, bigger actors to do a 1-season commitment, but if you're trying to sell a limited, you often will need a couple of those attachments, in your pocket when you go in to pitch it. I think a network's decision to do a limited usually is an awards play or, a prestige play where they say, okay, we'll spend all this money on a 1 season, of a show that doesn't have, the season 2, 3, where things get really profitable for them. We'll do the 1 season, but we want an Emmy for this, and we need to know that you're casting it or able to cast it at a level that could get that Emmy. And so I think there's a heavy burden on the limited series to have a shot at, that kind of prestige. And I think if that's what you're selling a limited, it can be really helpful to have, an actor or two that really mean something to them, that kind of feel awardsy or feel, prestige, that can really help your chances.
Oh, for our, season 1 of Waco, we had, Taylor Kitsch and Michael Shannon attached to it before we went to any networks. And, I'm so grateful to them for signing up for it. We hadn't worked with them before that, and they were just the best. And just the ins and outs of the process, they were just the greatest.
And there's no way we sell that limited series without those two guys attached beforehand. 0% chance.
0%.
Yeah.
If you're not able to attach big actors, if maybe your career hasn't reached that level where you have that kind of buy-in or clout, you can go ahead and create the kind of really juicy characters that, people will want to fight play, So instead of spreading out fun, say in your pitch, instead of spreading out fun stuff for all 8 people in your ensemble to do, if it's a limited, maybe you want to, we've kind of focused a lot on this whole limited thing, but maybe create 1 or 2 leads that are very, very juicy, with lots and lots of good stuff that could attract a lead. And then in your pitch, even if you don't have somebody attached, in your visuals, like your pitch deck or your PowerPoint or, whatever visuals you have, you can actually think of a couple of great actors who would be great in that role and show, pictures of them to give the buyer the idea of like, oh, I get it. This would be a great role for a Bryan Cranston type, or, oh, this would be a great role for a Brian Cox type, whatever.
Yeah. And I'll say too, like, if you come in like every role is an Emmy part, that is not possible. Like, there is a certain amount of real estate in it. Like, and I'll say, for our Waco series, the network bought it, and then they said, look, you have these 2 world-class actors and you're spreading around screen time all over the place. Like, we want every scene to have one of those 2 in it. And we sort of had to do this mental calculus of like, okay, how do we wind all these informational scenes, all these different scenes that they weren't in the original script? How do we wind all those scenes through one or the other of, Michael Shannon or Taylor Kitsch? And we really it took us, like, we had already written drafts of all 6 episodes, and we went back to 0 and rebroke everything from the top, and added, changed so much. But then we had a show, and and they were right. They were right to and that's been a lesson we've learned is, to Stacey's point, if you want to create a star role, make sure that role is the role. If there's someone solving a clue in a scene, it should be that person, not the random guy who just showed up for one scene. You know what I mean? If there's, the barn burner speech, at the end of the teaser, it's that person's. It's not some random, scientist who shows up to tell you something. You know what I mean? It's find ways to make those parts shine and give them the funny lines, the cool lines, the awesome actions. Give it to them.
The flashbacks, the privilege scenes, the voiceovers, the affairs, the complications, the traumas, all of it.
Yeah.
But would you say that? I'd say that's more for a limited, where you're trying to attract a big old star. Than you. I think for ongoing series, it'd be great if they're all fantastic, very individualized roles. But I think it's okay to have more of an ensemble with an ongoing. What do you guys think?
I think so. I think that's, true. Just looking at Succession for an example, you have, probably an ensemble of 10 that are, fairly, really, 5 that are, probably leads, and then another 5 that are strong supporting that have about the same amount of real estate. And
that's true. That's true.
But I bet when they pitched it, it was all about Logan and Kendall.
Yeah, I think Logan and Kendall was probably.
Here's the spine.
Yeah,
it's this guy and this guy, and then
I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
And slowly over time, they go, oh, this character is good. Let's bring them more forward. But I think, knowing who your real leads are. And I would say too, Joe Pickett, that was trying to figure out, find somebody we really loved, to play that role. And, it took some okay, how do we make this character really, interesting right up top, and to do, give him some depth, some some meat on the bone to like attract someone like Michael Dorman. You know, we loved Dorman's work. We're like, we got one shot at this guy. Like, let's make sure this is a meaty enough character for him to want to sign up for multiple seasons. So I'd say even, you know, for an ongoing, like finding, you know, you want your audience to fall in love with your characters. Like you need great actors for that, and kind of knowing who your leads, who's going to be on the poster, and making sure to give that person or those people some real meat on the bone in the pilot, I think is really important.
I think with TV too, also great, and I don't want to get too far away from the pitch aspect of it, but also great relationships. I think movies can have more of great characters who are super interesting and they're going through something amazing, but it's not like Die Hard. What are the characters' names again? I always forget. John
McClane.
John McClane.
John McClane.
John McClane. You know, great character, right? And of course the wife, ex-wife, you know, it's in flux. That's a cool. Basically, if it was a TV show instead of a movie, their relationship would be way more a part of it. Mm-hmm. See what I mean?
Yeah.
How they relate to each other. I think movies can have more like kick-ass characters where it's them against the world. I think TV, it's going to be more about. It's not so much them against the world; it's them relating with the other characters.
Yeah, well, movie is a plot delivery vehicle, and television is a character delivery vehicle. Like it's characters, relationships,
delivery.
Relationships, and I feel like that's how you really get to know character is through relationships. So yeah, television is all about I'd say much more about relationships than movies. So here's an important question that your buyer in a pitch is going to be asking is, why now? What about this? Why, like, let's say you've adapted a book that was written 20 years ago and you're pitching it now. Like, why now? Why is this the moment? Or just anything, like regardless of book, anything, whatever you're pitching, like, why is this a necessary story for this moment in time? Because the things that really hit, the things that really work are things that feel topical, but not too topical. Not like the thing everyone's talking about, it's like, like Drew and I had an AI thing. We're like, right now that's just way too front and center a topic. Let's just let that one go. We're not going to pitch that. We're going to let that one go and focus on other things because it's too topical right now. Mm-hmm. Where, a year ago, it might have been a great time for it.
Let's talk about some of the things that we've said, because this is literally something that we'll say out loud in the pitch. We'll have something written where it's like, and we always ask ourselves, why now?
Yeah,
because...
This is a hugely important detail, hugely important detail.
So maybe
truly.
We can just say what some of our things have been. One we just did was because we are in the era of family reckoning. It was a family story, right? And things were not going well. So we talked about we are in the era of family reckoning. So even though this is an old story, an old true crime, it's about families, and my God, with politics and COVID and social media, things have never been more fraught among families, and families are breaking up. So that was our. Yeah. What are some ones that you guys have done?
Similarly, I would just go back to maybe that show we've alluded to, the crime family show. That has not been made, but we had a similar idea in that one. Is like we are in an era of not just family reckoning, but of children growing up into adults and realizing their parents might not be, who they thought they were, and coming to terms with that. And the kind of end of the eras of denial and what else did we say? Oh, and just in terms of information, trying to keep, a society closed from the information of the world is becoming harder and harder at this moment in time. And all of those things kind of felt like it made it a very, you could have told the show 10 years ago too, but you wouldn't have all those elements. It wouldn't have why is the foundation of this secret family starting to crack, and so,
because we were saying the for the first time in history, they can see over the walls of the fortress they've been held in. They can see what other people live like on social media and on their phones. And they're starting to go wait, why is everyone else living like that? And we're living like this, and that naturally is going to create some, how do you keep people penned in once they see what's possible? Joe Pickett, what was the why now on that? Was right now, is a time when we're seeing a lot of people acting irresponsibly with their jobs. Like we're seeing, politics is falling apart. Like just everyone's acting crazy. And here's a guy who does the right things, sometimes for the wrong reasons because he's scared not to. But here's a guy who's willing to do whatever it takes to do, the right thing in a situation, no matter what the cost is. And it feels good at this moment in time, with politics, with everything where it is, to see one person doing their job like wholeheartedly.
I think you even had almost like after a decade of anti-heroes.
Yeah.
That
we're
was it,
living here
yeah.
where people in politics actually are anti-heroes, and then characters, like they're great characters. They're great characters, but we've had it up to here with anti-heroes. Like, what about a hero? What about a good person who fights the good fight? And there's still all the conflict, but yeah.
Yeah. And he's not always doing it because he's a good guy. He's doing it because he's scared if he doesn't do the right thing, he's going to turn out just like his dad. And he's driven by a negative fear to do right, no matter what the cost is to himself and his family. And just that.
Which gives your hero a little zhuzh. You don't want a hero who's all like, he's Dudley Do Right. He's boring. You want somebody who's got some
some
conflict
some
in
reason. Yeah, some conflict, internal conflict.
Waco, the aftermath that season, we could maybe talk about the why now of that in a minute too, because I think that Waco, the original was supposed to just be a limited series. There was no plan to follow up, and then when we started talking to the network about a follow-up season, it was like, well, a lot of people knew that Timothy McVeigh was very inspired by what happened at Waco to do this terrible thing. That's what really motivated him. But what a lot of people don't know is that the things he was inspired by and the things he was reading and the kind of, his specific brand of anti-governmentism was, very much in line with what we just experienced, on January 6th in the United States, and how similar, there's just a direct through line between, what he was learning and what he was believing, and what we just saw on all of our TVs, in 2021, and a lot of people didn't know that connection, and that's maybe a reason to kind of reveal that now, is that this isn't just a lone wolf and then this one thing that just kind of a riot that broke out. Like, this is actually part of the same movement, and I think that was a surprise to most people that we were pitching that to.
I think it was something like, why now? Because you can draw a direct line from Ruby Ridge to Waco to Timothy McVeigh to the rise of the militias to what you were seeing in America today.
That's it. Yeah, that's
and because we actually had sold it before January 6th, because we were in the writer's room when January 6th happened, which we all saw on our coffee break on our phones and crapped our pants of like, oh my God.
Yeah, no, you're right. We were pitching it as like what
all
we're
the
feeling in the
ingredients
country. Yeah.
January 6th did not have to happen for all the simmering ingredients that led to it.
That's it.
Well, and there's this rise of the militias that we were all seeing, and that was all, happening. And all, a lot of those militias used, Waco as their rallying cry. And I get it. Like, that was, Waco was the moment in which the, citizens of our country and the government, sort of lost their innocent connection, to some extent. And so, so we pitched it as like, this moment can only be described through these steps along the way. And the why now of it, like, when we're watching the January 6th, like, riots, mid writer's room, we're like, this why now.
That's
like,
why now.
That's why now. And
if you are creating something and you don't have a why now, I think that means you have to think a little bit. Not only should you be able to think about it to make a better pitch, but honestly, that's the kind of thinking that's going to help you make a better show. Because you're basically saying, like, what makes it current and also universal, and that's going to make a better show when you figure that out.
That's a great point. And it's important. You got to find that. You got to speak to that, because they will, if the buyers don't feel like that's been touched in any way, they will ask about that. And if you're like, well, why now? Because good stories are always good, right? That's not an answer, where, like, to have a reason that this story couldn't have been told 10 years ago. This story can't wait 10 more years. It has to be told now. And this is the reason. And that's important. And if you have to, dig deep and find it, like, that is time well spent.
Another question is why you? Like, or why us? Like, why are you the person who should tell this story?
Yeah. Another
Totally.
hugely important thing to touch on in a pitch. Why
This
you're
can
the
be a
person.
fabulous time if this is actually from your life at all. If you are pitching something that's like, for example, a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine now are going out with a pitch soon. They've been working on it, and I've been reading their documents and stuff. Really fun. It's the woman who's one of the two writers. She actually she's a nice Jewish girl from America who went to a Mexican prison for 2 years in the 70s. That's true. And at first, their pitch doc, that detail was buried way down. Like, oh, and by the way, it's a true story. I'm like, my God. If I had spent 2 years in a Mexican prison in the 1970s, I wouldn't shut up about it. That's all it would be at first. I mean, my God, talk about a great, like, why me? Because I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
delicious.
great. Yeah. And the why you, like, if you're writing a project that's like a Native American story and you're a white person, like that's going to be a tough one for you to sell. You know what I mean? That's unless you have a very compelling why you.
Yeah.
Unless there's some aspect of that I can't imagine off the top of my head. That's going to be difficult, but the why you, what are some good examples of why yous that you guys can think of?
Without getting like, too specific, I think, if you're able to get personal, even if it's a little uncomfortable, if you're able to say like, I had this, terrible thing happen to me as a kid. And so I understand what this character is going through. I understand how difficult it is to come back from an event like that because I experienced something very similar to this, or if that's true, if that's real, don't be afraid to like, call upon some, something from your past, even if you don't want to specifically say what it is, but if you do have something that, you can relate to in this, main character in some way. I think, we found, we had one pitch where we kind of had, something fairly personal that we brought up, and I felt like it was the most engaged everybody was, in the entire pitch was in that moment of like, oh wow, you do get, the psychology of this in a personal way, and that goes a long way.
To reiterate what Drew said, you have permission to keep it vague. You can literally say, like, without getting too personal, we experienced something very similar to this, like a childhood trauma where we learned, that some of our family was built on lies, or what. You don't have to. You don't actually have to. If you're not comfortable, if you don't want to name the thing, you do not have to.
Yes, I think that's right. And if you're, I don't know, making a show about terrorism and, you lost a family member in 9/11, like that's the kind of thing you should bring up. And even if it does feel a little, vulnerable.
Like Pete Davidson.
Like
in
Pete
his
Davidson,
Saturday Night Live,
that's right.
he did the SNL opener after October 7th and said,
Yeah,
oh my
right.
God, why is Pete Davidson talking about this? Well, actually, I'm a pretty good person to talk about it.
And he like hit that out of the park, I thought, in terms of like,
Killed
why
it.
am I? He killed it. I thought that was just beautiful what he said. And even though what he's alluding to has, is not directly connected to, what's happening right now, it still felt like emotionally he truly is a great person to be speaking to us right now. And that if you can, if you can find that thing, that really.
It's also worth watching that episode just for the I'm just Pete. So good.
That was really good. Yeah.
John, what were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say too, like just, you probably aren't a writer because everything's been awesome, your whole life. There's probably a moment at which you're like sort of had to snap into distancing yourself from reality due to some trauma, some pain, like that thing that made you want to write. Like there's a world in which you can mention that. And, Drew and I have actually shared, details of our personal lives that I haven't been very open with a lot of my friends. You know what I mean? Like I don't, things we don't necessarily talk about in a public way or, with lots of people. And, it's a fine line, what's oversharing, what's going to be like, oh Jesus, like, I don't want to hear that, versus
Check.
like, but saying enough to say like, hey, like Drew and I had weird experiences growing up, from military school to, all kinds of weird random stuff. And we can speak to certain things from the inside. Like what can you talk about from the inside? Like what when you're talking to these execs, what do you know about from a personal inside way that they don't, that you can be the expert on, that you can be, when we, sold Waco, we had met, on our own dime. Like we had met a whole bunch of the surviving Branch Davidians. We had dinner with them. We had, flown around the country and met, survivors all over the place. We had been to Mount Carmel. We had gone through the archives at Baylor and scanned them all, read, people's personal document. Like we had become, experts to a point that we talked to people who wrote books on Waco, and we'd be filling them in on details that we had learned that they didn't know about. And, I felt really proud of, how deep we went on that one. And so by the time it was, we were pitching it, we knew that story in a way that, nobody we met over the course of it, like even when we, met like people who were there, they didn't know the other side. They didn't know what was going on the other side. They just thought the other side was evil. You know what I mean? Both sides. And we could fill them in like, oh no, you had that wrong. Like, so we, the why us was like, hey, we had done the deep dive. We had done the work.
Expertise, I would say.
Yeah, expertise.
Why
That's
expertise.
That satisfies that question too in a big way. Of nobody knows more about the story than we do, and that's why us. And it does always help, if you have another layer of like, I emotionally understand this story because of this, that always helps too, of course. But
Geography or experience, I would put that in there. I have to say, people just poop their pants with excitement over the fact that you two are from Minnesota.
It's true.
They're just like, Minnesota, my God, that's real. How authentic.
I know.
They're
we
like,
were attached to
Pittsburgh's
one
medium
show.
real. Because it's kind of
One show at one point that we weren't writing, but we were attached to executive produce and direct, and it was literally the main character. The whole story was set in Minnesota, and that was like really our
Minnesota,
whole reason for being
wow.
there. We're from Minnesota. Okay, that's all we got. That's all we have to add here.
Enough said. I think sometimes people don't realize
True.
that like, maybe a writer that perhaps is listening to this who feels like a little bit of an outsider. Maybe they don't know anyone in Hollywood. Maybe they don't live in Los Angeles. Maybe they feel like that's a drawback. Honestly, anyone who has authentic experience of something outside of New York or LA and the entertainment industry, that's such a plus. Like, if you were raised somewhere weird, or you've been in prison, or you've been in the foster care system, or you worked on a fishing boat, or, if you had some kind of cool job, or somebody in your family did, or grew up somewhere like people in LA are pretty into like real America. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
right now, people are looking
true.
for pitches about real America. And so being from real America is actually real cool. And then there's all the basics too of like, even just the basic family history of you used to do spelling bees, you used to do beauty pageants, whatever you can bring to it. Your real life experiences might be quite a bit more interesting than you're giving them credit for.
Yeah. I think that's well said.
Oh, and I'd like to say, just from a branding perspective too, like a lot of these buyers, if they have something, like if you talk to the human being you are, your life experience, like all the people in this room, they're all storytellers. They all have, signed up for a business that tells stories because they love stories. They love hearing about what goes on in people's lives. And if you speak to that, they will remember you, and they will have like something else may, let's say the fishing boat. Let's say you worked on a fishing boat and they're like, that's so crazy. And then a fishing boat, script, comes across their desk, and they're like, who would actually be able to rewrite this and do a good job of this is that person who pitched the fishing boat, person with a fishing boat history. Like those little ways of branding yourself, like will make you memorable, where, if you're trying to get a job at like Goldman Sachs and you're like, I once did ayahuasca and, went crazy in the jungles and lived off, like snails, like that's not going to be a winning play. But if you're trying to sell something that's about that, by God, tell them, like, it's fine. Like, everyone's, got a, drug habit that they've gotten over, hopefully, and everyone's a hot mess. Like, speak to it. It actually makes you cooler,
I think that should be the summary. I know we're not at the summary yet, but I think it should be, everyone's had a drug habit they've gotten over. So use yours. I have one more to add about the why you, like, why me? Why am I the right person to write this? If all else fails, love, like passion for the subject. Say it's something set in a sci-fi world, or it's something you simply can't have a connection to, or you say it, but it's quite tenuous. It's just like, I've always been into cowboys. I don't know. You can, hopefully you're writing it because you just love this material. Like, I'm working on a pitch now, and I have very little in common with the world or the characters because it's quite out there. There's no way I could, But I already planned in the pitch to say, like, I love a female-driven thriller. So often thrillers are about women being the victims. They're the subject of the sentence. I love a thing like Silence of the Lambs or, Rosemary's Baby, or something where the person is both the potential victim and the investigator, Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I can say I'm the right person for that because I fucking love it. Yeah. And I think that's if all else fails, you can do that.
Yeah, agreed.
I'd say the next question, what's the theme you're exploring?
Yes.
Like, what is the bigger question, the thing that gets beyond the thing, beyond the, like, what happens when a cop, has a drinking problem, like beyond that, like going deeper than that, you know what I mean? Like, what is the theme you're exploring? Like in The Order, I remember our theme for that was, people, we like exploring the idea that, like, everyone thinks, like, I'll believe it when I see it, but it's actually the opposite. It's actually, I'll see it when I believe it's there. And we're going to see, people who can't see what they're looking at. And slowly over the course of the series, one by one, they're going to start seeing the thing they couldn't see. And, we all tune out, opposite viewpoints in the news. We all like, there's this moment in time we're all in our little bubbles, and it's hard to see the other person's perspective because we refuse to see what we don't believe. And, so we wanted to explore that in a show, and that sort of touches a little the why now and a little like, I don't know, just what we thought was an evocative, thing to explore in a series.
Yeah, I would add too that I think sometimes the theme you're exploring can sometimes connect to the why now of it as well. Yeah. And I think that's really great when it does, to use that example of like this, I'll believe it when I see it versus I'll see it when I believe it. We were talking about how in the world at large over the last several years, you're seeing these like walls of denial kind of come crumbling down all over the place. And like a lot of people can relate to this kind of flip in terms of belief in their own lives in the last few years specifically. And so if you can kind of tie the theme that you're exploring into the why now, that can be great.
I agree. Mm-hmm. They go together so nicely and organically. It can flow well in the pitch itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's worth saying, like, thematically, we love the idea of exploring this. Mm-hmm. I feel like just really underscores that it's not just like a story with like, oh, a bunch of things happen and it's going to be awesome, but going, what is the thing behind, like, what is the reason to do this? What is the,
what does this mean?
Yeah.
What does this mean?
What does this mean? Yeah.
And I agree with you that it's okay, or it's actually good to use either the word thematically or themes. We want to explore themes of loneliness. We want to get into the themes of power, whatever,
Yeah. And then, I'd say the next question is, where's this going? Like, to know, like, by the end of season 1, we'd like to be in this place. By the end of, season 2, we'd like to explore this other thing. And then season 3, is going to be a, reset, like whatever that is. Like, if you can talk through, I would say 3 seasons, not like, in season 8 we could do this, and season 9, like, not go, to, crazy town, but like 3 seasons. Like, if you have a sense of where you're going over the course of the first 3 seasons, and frankly, like a show like Breaking Bad, they were planning to kill, who is it, Aaron Paul's character at the end of
Jesse,
the pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they realized, like, oh, they're great together. Like, let's rethink this. And, so they were halfway through shooting and they, took a break, rewrote some stuff and made them like kind of a duo throughout the series. And it became about their relationship. Or what you decide and pitch may not be what it is, but they're going to like, it is better to show up with a plan that changes versus like, I don't know, in Success, I'm sure there's a season 2. Like, to have that thought out, to have, some sense of where it's going, can really be helpful.
Yeah, and you don't need that much, when you're talking about, season 2, season 3s, you need a few things that kind of just what you're trying to elicit is just this show has legs. It has an engine beyond season 1. There's, more fuel to throw on that fire. But you don't need like a huge amount of detail either. It's
probably just like one sentence per season, to be honest. And season
like our
2,
main character is going to do
this,
this, and this, and and that's going to be the spine of season 2. Really keeping it brief, but just all you're trying to do is plant the seed that there's continued propulsion in future seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can't tell my son has a basketball out there. I can't tell if he's about to start shooting hoops at the. But yeah, like, season 1, we like, in the order, I think, by the end of season 1, this person will die and then we'll start to see this start to happen. Season 2 becomes this character versus this character. And then season 3, we're going to see this, crazy thing happen and how all the relationships shift as a result, just real simple, real simple, couple sentences per season, but to give a sense that, hey, you've thought this through, you've really thought this through. You have a real plan. You have, some real craft and you've thought, you've really spent time with this.
Do you think it's, we've obviously said that, for season 2, 3, and 4, you're only giving it like a sentence or 2 each. What about in the pitch itself? Do you spend most of your time talking about the first season, or do you spend most of your time talking about the pilot? Obviously, you're going to have to gonna have to get into the characters and the themes and the why now and all that. But do you do that by hanging all those little Christmas ornaments on the Christmas tree of the first episode or the Christmas tree of the first season?
I'd say it depends on the show. Like Waco, like we talk through, this is what it's going to feel like. This is what the season's going to be. This is what you have wrong. Like your knowledge of these events. This is where it's different than what you think it is. You know what I mean? Like we sort of had a lot more broad view what the series is going to be. Whereas the order, a lot of that was the pilot. We really had a deep pitch of the pilot and the world, the pilot and the world were like the 2 big ones. And then here's where season 1 is going, season 2, season 3. And that was just kind of a quick little blip.
I bet for limiteds, as Waco was, you have to sort of tell the season. And I bet for ongoing, you kind of pitch the pilot more. That's my guess,
That feels right. Like it's helpful to have a really good last beat of the pilot and to be able to really nail that. On the last scene of the pilot, this is what's going to happen. And, to really get across that if anyone who watches this pilot is going to have to watch the next episode. And that's a really good thing to get across, whether it's limited or ongoing, I think. But yeah, I think you're right. Maybe in the limited, it's a little bit more about the season than maybe an ongoing. But yeah, if at least, kind of letting them know where the pilot episode ends, I think is really helpful.
And ending with a cliffhanger, that's good, or a nail later.
Some great, some great beat that kind of gives you, okay, that's where we are in the story. You're pitching me a season kind of arc story, but that's where we are at the end of the pilot. That's, and it can always change later, but it's still kind of feeling good about that, and how it comes across in the room is really good, even if it changes after the fact.
And then I'd say the last question of the 7 is, who are your main characters and why do we care about them? That may be, something you have in the middle of this, I'm not saying that's the last question, but, finding a way, give us the pieces of them that lets us know why we should love them and why you love them. Like, tell us why you love, like Stacey always quotes a thing, what I love, others will love, and I will show them how. Like, I love that. You know, there's a reason you're pitching this. There's a reason you love this. Like, talk about what you love about these characters so that the people listening can fall in love with these characters too. Because, you know, TV is a character medium. People are going to want to show up to love characters, or, you know, be like shocked by whatever it is. Like, you know, explain what makes you love these characters and why we should.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, I also think you would probably put the characters in action. And that's why I sort of phrased it earlier. It was a bad analogy, but talking about the Christmas tree of like, are you mostly talking about the pilot, or are you mostly talking about the whole season? And I think it's because I don't think it would be a good pitch to just go, here is a list of my lead characters. You know, so-and-so is a lawyer with a drinking problem, and God, does he love his horses, you know, or whatever. You can't, like, if you're just doing that, it'd be very boring very fast. But if you put them in, you know, when we first meet the lead character, you know, who's a lawyer with a drinking problem, he is actually putting down his favorite horse, and it kills him because he, you know, loves that horse. And I might be pitching something from Yellowstone. I think he puts down a horse. Anyway, but you know, you put them in action, and then so you can throw in all the details and the adjectives and the descriptors and all that. But you put them in action, and then you lead to the next character, and now you're into the relationships. You know, like he goes to cry about it to his maid because, you know, all his relationships have fallen apart, and the only person he's close to is this maid. Or obviously, these are all hideous pitches, but you know what I mean. You put the characters on their feet.
Yeah, don't do a list.
Don't do a list.
Put them in action of some kinds, and give us something we can remember. Like, oh, that's a, you know, like I remember House of Cards. Like, yeah, he strangles a dog. Remember that?
Yeah.
The dog was hit, and he strangles a dog,
Puts
and
it down.
puts it down, and he feels nothing. You're like, oh, I guarantee that was in the pitch. You know, I guarantee that moment was pitched. Like, this is the kind of guy where this happens, and this is how he reacts. And everyone in that room, I'm sure, went, oh, that's bananas. That's a crazy way to act in that situation. Like,
and he broke the fourth wall while doing it. So I imagine the people pitching are like, so he turns to the camera, right? And he says, flibbity flabbity. You know, they probably acted it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though that fourth wall breaking can, you know, that can cut both ways. You know what I mean? Like,
all I
want
to do, dear listeners, is break some fourth walls, and no one will let me. All I want is for every episode of television to have a musical number and people breaking fourth walls, and it just keeps getting shot down.
I was gonna say with the characters too. One thing I'm always tempted to do in pitches to kind of, you know, is to pitch too much plot or story. And I think one thing we've learned over time is that's where you can kind of lose people a little bit when you are stuck too much in the plot, you know, of the show. And I think if you can hold that until you get into this character section, you're talking about your main characters and saying, you know, our main character is David. David is a lawyer who loves horses. And, you know, in the pilot, what happens to David? You know, if you can kind of weave the plot through the character, I think that's always super helpful. And it doesn't need to be in order, because really, you know, as John, you were saying, this is a character medium. That's what your audience in the room, the buyers are really thinking, okay, do we have great characters? Is this a really, you know, rich collection of characters? But pitch all your plot, even if it's completely out of order or whatever, through the characters in this section.
Yes.
Yeah.
And hint at, or even be overt about, potential conflicts and shifting alliances.
Yes.
Because I feel like so much of TV is shifting alliances. You could just do that forever of like, this season, these two like each other. Next season, they hate each other.
Yeah.
Third season, they sleep together.
So just to summarize, so, you know, 7 questions to answer in your pitch. What genre is it? What is it like? Why now? Why you? What's the theme you're exploring? Where is this going? And who are your main characters, and why should we love them? So if you answer all those questions, those will be a lot of what the buyers are, you know, wondering themselves. And if you lay that out for them, that, you know, you've done half their job for them in wanting to buy it.
I just have to jump on with one, which is I think you have to tuck tone into that comp section of what is it like. That's where you talk about whether it's, you know, rock and roll or gritty or classic or, you know, that's where
good,
you mention the word tone overtly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Tone. And I think tone, a lot of that is, you know, by comparisons. It's like the, you know, Silence of the Lambs. Like, that gives you a really complete sense of tone. Or You know what I mean? Or Saw. Like those are two different tones, both in the kind of genre space. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, but I agree with that.
All right. Fantastic.
Okay. Actionable tip of the week?
I would say do this kind of list of thinking, to go through this list of questions, not just to make your pitch better, but to make your potential series better. All of these questions will help you create a deeper, more meaningful, better show.
Yeah. Great.
Hey, if you like our show, please consider taking a minute to subscribe and to rate us very, very highly wherever you get your podcasts. Watch us on YouTube. It's a lot of fun. Nick, our producer, does fun stuff with it. It's really cool. And tell a friend about us, TikTok us, Instagram us. I don't know. That all really helps us find our audience. Thank you. We appreciate you spending time with us.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.